Yes, This song is called Be the Change, inspired by the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who lived for peace and not violence, and told us to be the change we wish to see in the world. Freedom's calling, I feel the fire that's deep inside us. Everybody wants change, but tell me who will guide us. To the leaders that pass away, put up your lighters. It's a beautiful struggle, but it cannot divide us. We're the ones that we've always been waiting for. See yourself in the mirror and open up the door. Walk through it and feel the love throughout your pores. Be the light, life's purpose is to feel joy. Metaphysical, lyrical, standing up for truth. The only one that makes change is walking in your shoes. Be the example, don't complain about the news. Making music and serving the world with the loo. Now you can be the same.
Oh my word, the monkeys are bouncing all over the place this week. I just got back from a kind of a whirlwind trip down south. Went to, drove all the way down to the Phoenix area for work and worked in Phoenix, Mesa area for a few days and drove over to Albuquerque, managed to stop by Sedona. It was my first time actually being in Sedona, and wow, that place is absolutely amazing. Some of the most beautiful countryside I've seen here in this beautiful country we live in. And quite an experience. The energy down there, like, people are always talking about the energy of Sedona, and I understand why they're talking about it now, because that place is definitely charged up. There's a lot of monkeys down there, Ramon, in the Sedona area. And that's all I got to say, is there's definitely a lot of monkeys down there.
Yeah, here in Japan, I've a student, like I was mentioning last week, a student of mine mentioned about she went down to Yonaguni and she took pictures, but then she saw on TV, which I couldn't find any, like I was looking for pictures and evidence, but she said a place like off the coast of Yamaguchi, there was one like it but smaller. And we can ask our guest today later on if he's heard about it. But let's see. So we have a lot of things in the news. I've been poking around and putting stuff on there. But before I start with the news, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter. Let's see, where else?
YouTube,
Vimeo. Daily Motions is cut out. Because Tom was not happy with it.
Yeah, I don't. When I got to start cutting through too much red tape, I say, no, thank you.
Yeah. So here's one news section. I don't know if you got to see this, Tom. China and India fighting the UFO invasions. Basically, I don't know. It sounds like a little exaggerated story, but you can look at it and check for yourself. They just talk about, the constant surveillance that they have over their military and all that, which I am not surprised.
I like the story that we got up there about the whale falling out of the sky.
Yeah, how do you explain that one?
Yeah, I don't know. That one's pretty anomalous.
Maybe he was track and field. He was doing the long jump.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a pretty big fish or whale, excuse me. That's a pretty big chunk of meat to get. What was how far out?
50 miles or something like that.
No,
this is in UK, so you can look at the news. Just scroll down. There's a picture of Tom at the beach. Here's one. There's a secret chamber that was found in the I think it was in in the Great Pyramid shaft. So you guys can take a look at that, and we can also ask our guest about that. I'm sure he's aware of that one. The next one news is one that's been going around and everybody's been talking about, and that's the one that supposedly China and the U.S. have been doing a joint effort I think it's off the coast of California, with some UFO invasion thing. You know, these news kind of, I was telling Tom before, this stuff kind of really sounds to me like I could be 100% wrong, but it sounds to me like a false flag kind of thing.
Well,
Like
you know, Ramon, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, you know, so much of this stuff is just shadow boxing, and it's all thrown out there to distract us from what's really important, you know. And, you know, paying attention to what's really important, if you keep throwing out these wild stories and try to get the fear generated up high enough, people just don't pay attention to what the other hand is doing, so.
Yeah, that's very true.
All these things we see out there, especially out in these fields that we delve into, you know, you got to really use your discernment. I mean, that's so important with the raising of the consciousness on the planet right now. There's a lot of elements out there that really don't want to see people wake up and stand up for themselves and you know, call the kettle black when it is, you know. They just don't want to see that happen. So
yeah, here's another one. There was a papyrus found that was referencing to Jesus' wife. It does not mention who she is. It doesn't say Mary Magdalene, but he references his wife, and it also says that she will be one of the apostles. So here's some hard evidence on that one. There's a sinkhole in Louisiana, and no one's talking about it. So you can check out that news there. And here's one I really like too as well. I wonder how they did use carbon dating. The Bosnian pyramid was carbon dated to 24,800 years old. That's, wow. That's pretty amazing. So
our dating goes back. The stuff on this planet goes back a lot farther than
we're told.
Yeah.
And our guest has some pretty hard evidence of that himself. So.
Tonight,
go ahead.
tonight we have Dr. Robert Schoch, and I know all of you guys that are listening to us tonight are familiar with his work, and if you aren't, oh my word, where have you been? This guy's been out there for quite a while. He's actually a full-time faculty member at the College of General Studies at Boston University. And he's been there since 1984. He got his Ph.D. in 83 in Geology and Geophysics at Yale. And he has been really shaking up the academia world with some pretty amazing research. And the work he's done on the Sphinx is what really got me really looking at this guy. And I just like, oh, boom, there it is. We got some proof now that the academia there, the Egyptologists have been saying about that, 3000 BC dating on the stuff in Egypt is just not right. So anyways, well, let's get into this. Dr. Schoch, welcome to the 100th Monkey Radio.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we're very, very happy to have you here. We had Carmen Bolter on last week, and yeah, she's an absolute joy to speak with. And she was actually Ramon and my first exploration with the show into anything Egypt, really, and that's kind of surprising after doing this show for 2 years, finally breaking the Egyptian ground.
Yeah. What was her take? What was she? I'm just curious.
Well,
In a nutshell.
Well, she found a pyramid in the desert. She first found it by Google, and then she went there, and it's a tiny pyramid. It's like maybe the size of two men.
yeah, like 15 feet tall, something like that.
Yeah, and it was completely bombed. It was used as target practice by the Egyptian military. And you still had, like, you can see it from her pictures, they had 1942 bombs, unexploded bombs all over the place. So it's just like such a shameful thing.
Yeah, that is a shame. I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't been there. I have to admit, I haven't been there real recently, but I will be going there in December. I actually will be traveling to Egypt in December because I want to see what the latest situation is, and I'd like to continue my research, as you were mentioning, on the Great Sphinx, but also a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And I'm actually taking, I mean, if people want to go to my website and they want to join me, it's partly for me, but I am also taking a group to Egypt with me for late December, early January. We'll be there over the winter solstice, that type of thing, over Christmas and New Year's.
Nice.
Yeah.
And your website is?
My website's www.robertschoch, all one word. It's RobertSchoch.com.
Great.
So robertschoch.com. And I'm actually very excited about getting back to Egypt. Have you guys been to Egypt?
Have not.
No.
Oh,
No, I have not.
Come. You should come. And there's been a lot of turmoil over there, and I shouldn't say it that way. That's, I think, the perception outside of Egypt, because it has undergone a revolution. It's part of the Arab Spring. But all my personal contacts in Egypt, and I have many because I've been there many times, including a good colleague and friend of mine who's Polish. He just got back from Egypt. Is that it's very safe for tourists. So I'm not concerned about going there.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, well, what's the situation there? They're afraid to go. Or, at least in America, I can't speak for Japan, but in America, I think Americans tend to be very jittery about such things. And, of course, the American news carries the major headlines, and I don't want to sound the wrong way, but, exciting news of people getting killed in demonstrations, that makes the news. They don't show it when everything's calmed down again.
Yeah, Carmen was saying the same thing, and I heard somebody else, I don't know if you're familiar with William Henry. He also said the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
and I'll be seeing, actually there's a conference, in a couple of weeks, early October. I don't know if you're aware of that. Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. It's known as CPAC. It'll be in Palm Springs, California, and both myself and Carmen will be speaking there, as we have before. I've spoken there numerous times. But yeah, it's, and I know William Henry, it's, it's a situation. I wouldn't hesitate to go to Egypt. I would get on a plane tomorrow if I had the opportunity, except I have to teach my classes at Boston University. There's practical things like that. But it really is a wonderful country, so I would encourage people, if they're interested in coming, they should come.
Yeah, I hear that so much from people who have been there, that you don't listen to the propaganda on the TV.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what it is. I don't understand why they want to dissuade us from traveling like that, but I don't know.
Well, it serves certain purposes. I don't want to be too conspiratorial here, but serves certain interests to keep people very isolated, to keep people very, I'll call it sort of irrationally nationalistic, that type of thing, rather than having a broader, holistic worldview.
Right.
Let me ask you this question. When you travel abroad, because you travel to many different countries, when you look at the news, aren't you shocked that, the different news you get the different takes you get
Oh yeah,
overseas?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's very different being outside of the United States. The news you get, the perspective you get. And I mean, things are real. Syria, things are really happening in Syria. I don't doubt that whatsoever. On the other hand, when I was in Turkey just last month, we went at one point just to see the situation, and we would have turned back at the slightest sign of trouble if we had run into Turkish military asking us to turn back. But we didn't cross the border. We went right up to the Syrian border. Saw the checkpoint, saw the flags flying on the other side, and very different, should we say. And we saw the refugee camps, but very different than the picture that you see painted by the media, which of course is always the most dramatic, the scariest possible, it seems, that type of thing.
Yeah, and from what I have seen, people have exposed, there's what we're seeing in the media, there's a good amount of it that is staged.
That's what?
That's staged?
Oh yeah, staged, of course. And that's not necessarily staged by the media. I'm not sure which way you were going. I mean, sure, maybe the media stages some things, but you get an obvious media person there with a camera, and I know this happens in Egypt, it happens everywhere, and all of a sudden a crowd gathers because there is a camera there.
Right.
So all of a sudden, the very fact that the media is there is precipitating things that would not be occurring otherwise.
Right. Okay, well, enough with that. Let's get into some of your work. I mean,
get back to the ancient stuff.
Yeah, you've done some absolutely amazing stuff, and
thank you.
I gotta give you kudos for standing up to the academia and saying, no, this is the way I see it. These are my results, and I'm sticking to it.
That's basically what I try to do, and it can make people happy or unhappy depending on who they are. And I was going to say, I try to do that with everything. I mean, I do not play favorites. I don't agree with people just because they agree with me or just because it would suit my own purposes. I really don't want to get into it unless you insist on getting into it. But you mentioned Bosnian pyramids, for instance, and there's no pyramids there. But we don't need to get into that if you don't want to. So, it's not like and that would serve my agenda if there were. That's my point at the moment. But, you have to call things as you see them. So I do that on no matter what it is, if I'm making sense.
So,
yeah.
Real quick before we do get into the actual work that you've been doing, what's your opinion on overall state of the scientific research community and whether, them actually coming out of the quote-unquote box and actually looking at the evidence instead of poo-pooing stuff?
Well, there's a lot of agendas. There's a lot of paradigms, of course. There's a lot of worldviews that are threatened by the type of material I've been talking about, that I've been building up evidence for as far as the origins of civilization, as far as what causes climate change. And these two things tied together. I didn't know if you wanted to get into that. But, for instance, I think that the sun is incredibly unstable. There's a lot of evidence for that now. It's gone through major solar outbursts, and this is not something the standard academics, the standard status quo wants to hear, just like they don't want to hear that civilization goes back thousands of years earlier than they've all accepted to be the case. And if I could make a really quick plug, do you mind?
Certainly.
I have a brand new book out, just out in the last month. It's called Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. Forgotten Civilization.
Where can we find that?
You can find it on Amazon. If people go to my website, again, Robert Schoch, and spelled Schoch, Robert Schoch, all one word, .com. If they go to the front page, they'll see a picture of the cover on the right side. They can click on that. It'll take them to links to Amazon, which is frankly the least expensive way to purchase it right now. Amazon, runs great deals. But I address just what you're asking me. in that book. I have a couple of chapters talking about the status quo scientific community, the concept of paradigms becoming entrenched. People don't want to buck the system. They don't want to buck the established paradigm. Frankly, scientists, and I know this from the inside, I'm an inside academic.
Right.
You know, I teach at Boston University. I'm a tenured faculty member. But a lot of people don't like me, again, because I sort of say, I follow the evidence where I believe it leads, and I say what I think based on what I see, whether it's the redating of the Sphinx, the causes of climate change over thousands of years, or talking about the status of the scientific and academic community. And you have a lot of people in the scientific and academic community who are wedded to certain paradigms, to certain worldviews, to certain theories and hypotheses, and it's very, very difficult for them to change their opinions, even when there's good evidence to counter their opinions. Because there's a lot of psychology here. There's a lot of ego tied up.
Right.
Scientists are just like any other people in that they don't want to be countered. They don't want their pet theories that they've supported all along to fall by the wayside. They have a vested interest, psychologically, emotionally, as well as financially in many cases.
Right.
So if you've got lots of funds and lots of grants, and it's all been supporting a certain theory or a certain paradigm or a certain, in our specific case, concept of when and where and how civilization arose, and all of a sudden there's evidence contrary to what you've been advocating all this time, that's not a good situation.
Right.
When it comes to either the ego or the paycheck. So,
have you noticed anything? Have you noticed any change though here in the last few years of?
Yes. What happens, and this has almost become a truism, or perhaps has become a truism, the way most change seems to occur is by new people, new blood entering a field. So as you get younger generations coming in, newer people coming in, and when I say newer, they could be physically younger, more or less, students coming up through the ranks, that type of thing, or people entering it that haven't been involved before, and they tend to be more open. In some cases, you can get people entering a field, and they're senior people, but they come from a different field. So again, they're coming to a new field, maybe with lots of background, lots of credentials, but they don't have the vested interest in the new field that they're coming into. So they, in my opinion, have a better perspective or a different perspective, and they can look at the evidence essentially with, new eyes. I think I had that advantage to a certain extent because I'm a geologist. My Ph.D., as you mentioned, is in geology and geophysics. I've always loved ancient history, and I read a lot about ancient history and actually studied it to a certain extent formally, but I didn't get so ensconced. I got sidetracked by geology, and I didn't get so ensconced that I became wedded to the conventional status quo, and so I went and did other things, then I came back to it, and I think that helped me quite a bit.
Right.
Did you ever receive any threats when you started coming out with all this evidence?
Well, yeah. What kind of threats are we talking about? I was never I was threatened, yes. I was never. I didn't have my kneecaps broken or anything like that. I was told I was once threatened, and I actually mentioned this in the book Forgotten Civilization, and I don't know the name of the person. I really don't. But I was at this conference. It was the Egyptological conference back in the early 90s, I think it was. And a very senior gentleman, apparently a very prominent Egyptologist, he didn't like what I was saying, and he came over and made a point of telling me that and he suggested in pretty straightforward terms that there was lots of rocks in the world, and as he didn't understand what I was talking about, but he didn't like the results, and there were lots of rocks in the world, and I might want to go study rocks other than in Egypt, basically. And I mean, I knew he was trying to intimidate and threaten me. I've had people try to get me fired. I've been in Egypt called behind my back was it Israeli Zionist spy or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Which in Egypt is pretty serious stuff to
right.
Someone like that. You know how Arabs in general and what they think of Israelis. And I'm not. I mean, I'm not Israeli. I'm not some kind of Zionist, but that these things happen.
So I guess growing up,
yes.
I was gonna say growing up in D.C. actually probably helped a lot.
Oh yeah, exactly. But it's rough and tumble to a certain extent, and anyone that thinks that academia sort of is this ivory tower, well, yeah, I guess it is ivory tower. Depends how you define ivory tower. But ivory tower, a bunch of people being very polite to each other all the time, they have no clue. It's very vicious, very nasty and ugly in many cases. I mean, I've had people spit at me, figuratively, well, somewhat literally too, coming up to me and screaming in my face so that I could feel they weren't doing it necessarily, but I could feel the spittle coming out and landing on me. Academics who were so, Egyptologists in particular, who were so enraged by it. So yeah, I've seen my share, and it gets depressing sometimes.
Yeah.
I can now look back on things that were over 10, 15 years ago, and sort of laugh about or think about. And then there's the other side. People have asked me, well, have they apologized to you now? Since they see me as vindicated by some of the new discoveries that I think we'll get into. And no, that's not how it works. I haven't had an Egyptologist who insulted me and lambasted me in the past come up and apologize yet. In fact, I don't think they need to apologize. I think a lot of them still think they're right, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, what's amazing is when you take the word skeptic, a true skeptic, it seems like that word is being misused because I hear people say they're skeptics, and it's like, okay, have you ever looked at any of the evidence that we're talking about?
Absolutely. No. The term skeptic, as used by a lot of people nowadays, really it means debunker, and a debunker is not a skeptic.
Right.
A debunker is someone who has their own agenda to serve and support the status quo at all expenses, including, very importantly, in science and academia, at the expense of the actual data, of the actual evidence. So debunkers, the so-called skeptics, and there's what do they call it, psychop or whatever, they're are professional skeptics, and all they are is debunkers determined to defend the status quo.
Right.
And then they will use any ruse, any shenanigans to do that. And some of them, they're really, I don't know if we want to go into who's that Randy? I guess Randy the magician?
Yeah.
He's just dishonest. Lots of people. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that on the radio. I don't know him personally or anything, but I think from a professional level.
We don't have any what's the word I'm looking for, Tom?
Censorship.
Thank you.
No censorship.
Yeah. So I'm not saying anything about. I don't know him as a person, but from what I've read of his arguments and whatnot, and maybe we shouldn't pick on him specifically, but these people, they haven't looked at the data, they don't understand the evidence in many cases. They just go with the status quo. They're just there to
well, here's
what they're going to support.
Here's my question when it comes to that, and then we'll move on to some of the ancient sites. But what is a magician doing in the scientific field? I mean,
well, yeah, that's the thing. It's not, and I would
it's
say
like that. That alone already, like he was the one behind debunking the whole. What do you call that medicine field?
Homeopathy?
Yeah, he was behind. Yeah, homeopathy. He was behind the whole thing, debunking the whole thing when these people had like proved and done double-blind tests.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, why are you sending a magician? What does he know about?
Yeah, he's gotten very involved.
It's like
in
sending me to do surgery.
Right, he gets very involved in parapsychological studies, that type of thing. He claims that he can reproduce anything that they can reproduce, which he hasn't always lived up to his claims, that type of thing. But in a fundamental sense, I would say he doesn't really understand what, he doesn't. It's hard to know in some cases whether he's purposefully ignorant or he really is ignorant of certain things. For instance, many phenomena in nature, whether they're of I'll call it psychological or parapsychological or medicinal or geological or astrophysical, you can't just conjure them up on command.
Right.
And, things happen. Volcanoes erupt when they're going to erupt, or earthquakes occur when they're going to occur, or, just to use the example, precognitive dream occurs when it's going to occur, so to speak.
Right.
And you can't necessarily force these issues. And so then you get someone that, plays games about having, but didn't he have like $1 million
the challenge
or something? But that's not how you do science.
Right.
It's also, you don't do science, and a lot of people don't understand this. Science is not democratic. That's another issue involved in science is not democratic. It doesn't matter if 99% of the population believes X, Y, and Z, or even 99% of the scientific community, because the scientific community as a collective whole are a bunch of specialists in a lot of different fields, and in many cases, frankly, their opinion doesn't really matter in a different field where they have no expertise. They've never looked at the data.
Right.
So, you go back. I personally believe that Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler were correct that, yes, the Earth actually does physically go around the sun. But if you go back to the year 1494, just to pick a year, virtually 100%, not 100%, but virtually 100% of all educated people thought the sun went around the Earth.
Right.
So, big deal. It doesn't mean anything as far as reality, which is correct.
Exactly.
You don't do it by consensus. You don't do it democratically. And then there are other things like, people like to have these trite sayings. I don't mean to go off on tangent too much here, but trite sayings like extraordinary.
Extraordinary evidence.
How's it go?
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary
evidence. Well, that's not, frankly, true at all epistemologically. And what is extraordinary claim and what is extraordinary evidence and whether it's required? It's just a trite saying that makes people feel good and sort of pulls the wool over the eyes of the unsuspecting public.
There you go.
Evidence is evidence, and there are different levels and types of evidence, and it's a very complex matter to figure out what evidence applies to what. And to just try to boil it down to these trite sayings that then somewhat, the unsuspecting public can nod their heads to and then feel good that, they don't need to change their basic outlook on the world, and they can go back to, not to put anything down, go back to watching football. And I have nothing against football per se, but you see my point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's a mess.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I do talk about some of these things in Forgotten Civilization beyond talking about the redating of the Sphinx, the site at Göbekli Tepe that I think we want to get to, my work in Easter Island, pushing back the origins of civilization, why civilization underwent literally cataclysmic demise at the end of the last ice age. Thousands of years, there was civilization thousands of years earlier than, according to conventional archaeologists, civilization was supposed to have occurred. So that's really one of the basic premises of the book.
Well, here's a sorry, Tom, I just want to mention something real quick. Here's something I found amazing. In the Japanese newspaper, they had a statue made out of clay that dated back to 30,000 years ago, and I was asking my wife about it. And it was like, yeah, they always talk about that. That's nothing new. And I was like, really? According to Western, archaeology, our civilization only goes back 6,000 years, and you guys have been talking about this for how long? And
yeah, there's a disconnect there, and then that gets into, I talked about this in Forgotten Civilization. How do you define civilization? What is civilization? That type of thing. But the standard view, just to put things in perspective for the audience, perhaps, the standard view, at least from a Western point of view, is that civilization goes back to about 3,000 to 3,500 BC. So 5,000, 5,500, maybe push it to 4,000 BC, which would be 6,000 years ago. It goes back to that time period. And the standard view is that civilization, so a very Western point of view, originates in Mesopotamia, the Middle East, basically.
Right.
And it originates then, and all of a sudden, there's this flowering of civilization 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and it's sort of all uphill, but progressive development since then from the earliest forms of civilization, a mere 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, to us now with, our computers and telecommunications and all the wizardry, technological wizardry.
They don't explain the apparent decline also from what we see evidenced in Egypt.
Yes, exactly. So the first clue here for me, this was over 20 years ago, is just what you said. Egypt, for instance. The earliest dynastic Egypt is very, very well developed, very sophisticated, and in fact you see a lot of decline, if you would, from the beginnings of Egypt. It seems to just appear full-blown, very high level of sophistication. The ancient Egyptians themselves stated that, they'd had predecessors, that it was more a reemergence of civilization, and what I found now with 20-some years of research is that I think they were absolutely correct. And to make a long story short, that I got into this looking at the Sphinx from a geological point of view. The Sphinx is typically dated, the standard attribution, the typical dating from an Egyptological point of view, status quo Egyptological point of view, is that the Sphinx was carved de novo from scratch about 2,500 BC. So not even 5,000 years ago, but 2,500 BC, Old Kingdom dynastic times. Over 20 years ago now, I first went to Egypt to study the Sphinx. I saw immediately, when I say immediately, on my first trip, that there was a disconnect there, because the body of the Sphinx is eroded not by wind and sand, as you expect on the edge of the Sahara Desert, but by water, by precipitation, by rain runoff, that type of thing. So I initially suspected, must go back to the earlier period, pre-Sahara time, so that would push it some thousands of years earlier. And it's been modified heavily since then. So the head is not the original head. It's clearly a recarved head. If people have an image of the Sphinx, the head is the dynastic head. I think it's a very early dynastic head, has actually African features, black, if you want to use that term, features on it, but it's a dynastic head. So it's been recarved later because probably the original head was heavily, heavily eroded.
Right.
But the body, what I call the core body, goes back to a much earlier period. That was my first determination. And since then, I've done seismic research around the base of the Sphinx, looking at subsurface weathering features. We actually found a chamber under the left paw. So I've done a lot of work and am absolutely convinced, and have convinced all my geological colleagues when I've gone to international conferences and spoken to geologists, they agree that the data's good. The core body of the Sphinx, the oldest portions, go back much earlier than when civilization is supposed to have occurred according to the conventional time frame, the conventional timeline. And something I want to point out really quickly is it's not just the core body of the Sphinx, but the Sphinx sits in a ditch or enclosure. When they carved the Sphinx originally was carved from solid bedrock. It's a huge statue, a couple hundred feet long, etc. Only the head initially stood above ground level. So they carved that, then they had to carve into the rock or cut into the rock to free up the body. When they did that, they didn't just pound and chip away and sort of scoop out the excess rock. They actually carved multi-ton blocks. They carved out blocks that weighed tens of tons in some cases, moved them just east of the Sphinx, and erected what is now called the Sphinx Temple. So it wasn't just carving the body of the Sphinx, it was also erecting this megalithic stone temple, and those both are contemporaneous and go back to that much earlier period. So we have real evidence right there, and this is what I've been saying all along, real evidence of very sophisticated civilization. They must have had some technology to do that thousands of years earlier than civilization is supposed to have existed.
Right. So what era, how long back was it that there was actual any type of consistent precipitation in the Sahara?
Prior to 3000 BC, prior to 5,000 years ago, and what you have in North Africa and the region that we now call modern Egypt is you have fluctuating climate during and since the end of the last ice age. So you actually had drier periods, you had wetter periods, you had drier periods, wetter periods, drier. So it sort of alternates on a semi-periodic basis, and the most recent period is the very dry period we've had for the last 5,000 years. So my initial suggestion was that it had to go back at least to the earlier wet period, but it couldn't be just at the end of that wet period, because we're talking at least 1,000 millimeters, a meter worth of erosion off the body of the Sphinx and the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. So this is a substantial amount. So I had to go back to that earlier period, and then, it's a function of how much actually was eroded away, how fast would that occur, et cetera, which is one reason I needed subsurface seismic data, because that gives a much better calibration. And my initial calibration was that the absolute minimum age for the Sphinx, for the core body of the Sphinx, the minimum age had to be 5,000 to 7,000 BC. Which right. Even 5,000 BC was driving the Egyptologists crazy, because that's a couple of thousand years earlier than they thought civilizations should exist anywhere.
Right.
So they were very upset by that, much less 7,000 BC. But that was my initial bracketing. I now think it could go back to 9,000 to 10,000 BC, but we could get into why.
Here's two things I wonder. So, for example, when they made the Hoover Dam, they lined it up. I forgot what star, but that's two. So if anybody goes there, let's say 1,000 years from now, they can know when that was made.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
according to the lining up with the Sphinx, when would that date it then?
It depends on how you view it. The Sphinx faces due east. For all practical purposes, absolutely due east. And what it lines up with, if you run the clock back, if you would, it actually lines up with what some people see as its own image in the sky, more or less Leo, the constellation Leo. And it would essentially be during the age of Leo, which you're pushing it back to 10,000 BC, that period of time. And I now have come to the conclusion that that's quite conceivable, both from a geological perspective and also a cultural perspective, that the Sphinx does go back to that early period, which is essentially the end of the last ice age. And this, I want to get into Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, because I was in the early 1990s, Egyptologists were saying, this can't be, blah, blah, blah. They couldn't disprove my data, but just couldn't be. And they literally were asking, well, where is there another site that is of the level of sophistication at such an early period? And since I first got involved in that, we've now got the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which goes back to 9 to 10,000 BC. In answer to your question of where the Sphinx is indicating, if you use astronomical and astrological, because they were not different things back then, I would say it's pointing to the age of Leo. It's pointing to itself in the sky, if you would.
Yeah.
Leo in the sky. That originally the Sphinx was not a Sphinx with a human head, I don't believe. I think it was a male lion.
Right.
Here's something else. I was looking on a different show, and back in the I forgot what year it was. I want to say the 60s. I could be wrong. In Mexico, they have found a skeleton that dated back to 250,000 years, and they were saying, okay, that can't be. And what they did was they went in and they checked it using diatoms. For those of you that are not familiar with diatoms, it's a type of plankton or bacteria?
Well, it's a plankton. It's a plankton. It's a siliceous, silica-based plankton, and they're very commonly used for stratigraphy, for dating and correlation. People don't always know what dating means in geology. Not all dating is in terms of years ago, but dating in terms of what time periods, what geological time periods.
So
just like in modern times we talk about the Elizabethan age, the Renaissance more generally, the Edwardian age, I'm thinking of England at the moment, but various time periods, yeah.
Right.
Have you used that on the Sphinx or Göbekli Tepe?
You can't. Well, yes, Göbekli Tepe is a different matter. The Sphinx, you can't do it because the Sphinx is carved out of bedrock limestone, and if you try to date it, on anything that has anything to do with the foraminifera in the case of the Sphinx or other fossils, other things that are found there, you're talking you're talking about the date when the limestone was formed, not when it was carved into the Sphinx.
Okay.
Right.
So you're talking millions, tens of millions of years ago. And that doesn't help you with dating the Sphinx at all. And there's so much misinformation, even among people that are, quote, ostensibly doing research on the plateau. They don't really know what, they're sometimes misinformed. So I get people all the time, they find a sea urchin on the Giza Plateau. They find one, on the back of the Sphinx or whatever. I found them on the back of the Sphinx. And they say, this proves that you're right. This proves that was underwater, blah, blah, blah. No, that's a sea urchin from millions of years ago that was died and got fossilized in the limestone that the Sphinx was carved out of. It has nothing to do with the Sphinx. So, and they mean well.
Yeah. What about the patina? Is there patina that's formed on the Sphinx itself?
No, the problem with the patina is that the whole thing has been so worked and reworked that you really don't have anything that you can survive. See, but the Sphinx is problematic in many ways. because it was used continuously for close to 5,000 years from dynastic times on. So this thing was worked and reworked and reworked. That is one reason I did subsurface seismic data, because that's something that is preserved. So what we looked at there was the base of the Sphinx and around the base of the Sphinx, and you get not erosion in the sense of removal of material, but you can look at weathering around the base of the Sphinx. And a fellow named Tom DeBecke, a Ph.D. in geophysics, I have a Ph.D. in geology and geophysics. We worked together. This was in the early 1990s. We used seismic, where you basically generate a sound wave. We used literally a sledgehammer on a steel plate to generate vibrations or sound waves that go into the rock, bounce around, come back up, and you can figure out from that the density of the rock, how far down different densities go, and this is a function of how long it's been exposed. It's mineralogical changes, weathering changes. So that is preserved, and I was able to look at that and therefore calibrate as best I could based on looking at data from known sites, like Old Kingdom sites, approximately, it's really a minimum age for the core body of the Sphinx. I was also able to determine or have more evidence to support something I'd already come to conclude looking at surface data, which is that when the Sphinx was originally carved, it was not totally free from the rock. Essentially, the rump on the western end merged into the bedrock at the lower area. So it served the Sphinx. The original Sphinx, which I believe was a male lion, was emerging from the bedrock, if you would. If people could picture it that way. So the very rump, the back end, was not totally free from the bedrock, and I think that was very purposeful. That was emerging from the bedrock, and I think it's significant relative to something we just mentioned, because in the period of about 8 to 10,000 BC, that period, you have Leo emerging from the horizon, where it's emerging with the rump on the horizon. So again, I think this may be alluding back to the astronomical significance, the astronomical version, if you would, of the lion in the sky, which at that period the Sphinx is facing on the vernal equinox, when the sun rises absolutely due east and faces directly toward the Sphinx and vice versa.
Do you think it's possible that it's as old as the previous era, the 26,000 prior to that, 26,000 years prior to that?
No, another precessional cycle further back. I don't think so. Because, and it's not just because I can't imagine it being that old, that would put me in the same camp as my critics. You can't be that because it can't be that. No, actually, I have evidence that I don't think it goes back to that earlier cycle, and that evidence has to do with the seismic work I was talking about. The depth of weathering, I don't think, is great enough to justify putting it back one precessional cycle further. But I mean, just to put it back where I'm putting it, say 8 to 10,000 BC range is, radical enough for certain people wanting to drum me out of academia.
Well, we didn't even have the wheel yet.
That's right. No, that's it. I mean, there was lots of problems. But getting to the corroboration, people were asking me, where's, independent evidence? Where's another archaeological site from that same period? And that gets to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is now well dated, and we can talk about maybe after the break or whatever. How that's dated, and that is well dated now to 8 to 10,000 BC, and supports what I've been talking about in Egypt. So it's very exciting. I think we're entering a new conceptual era, a new era in our thinking about such things, and hopefully correcting mistakes. And this is the way science should work. we extend our view and we learn new things, even if that means we have to overturn our old preconceptions.
Yeah, let's rewrite our books.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to, before we finish up, I want to get into the room that you discovered. And how big is it? What do you think it's in there?
Okay, we discovered a chamber. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes,
when
chambers.
we did the seismic, and we weren't looking for chambers, or as I would sometimes say, buried treasure. I wanted subsurface data to, to help either refute or corroborate, to help confirm what I was seeing on the surface in terms of my concept of dating the core body of the Sphinx. But we did stumble upon, if you would, found seismically this chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx, which some people want to deny, but I'm absolutely convinced it's there. All the seismic said it's there, and there's other evidence to suggest it's there. It's probably about 9 by 12 meters or so we're talking a good-sized chamber. Maybe the roof is perhaps 5 meters below the surface or so. So it's a fairly good-sized chamber. It seems to have something in it just based on the seismic signature, if you would, the way it, quote, rings, unquote. But what's in it, I don't know. And I am concerned because it's probably filling with water. It's probably being flooded now because water tables have been rising on the plateau. The Giza Plateau, for people who have not been there, is on the one hand, on one side, on the western end, you go out to the Sahara, and the Sahara extends across Africa. But on the other side, people live right up close to it. The greater Cairo area has, over 10 million people. So this is affecting things environmentally. It's affecting the water table, et cetera. So I think it's really imperative that this chamber be explored. Anything that's in it I would hope we could preserve it and before it's all deteriorated. And I'm hoping very much that with the new regime, we'll call it in Egypt, with new authorities, maybe we can get into the chamber in the sense of exploring it, if nothing else, probing it, putting a camera, drilling into it, putting a camera down there. This is one of the things I'm going to be inquiring about, seeing if I can make progress when I'm there in December.
Yeah, it just absolutely amazes me that it hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, I would heard a lot of rumors.
There's so many rumors.
Yeah, there was a lot of rumors that I saw.
Awash?
Yeah,
Awash.
He was in there, and they were taking things out already because of that. But they were doing it in the secret of night, and many, there were quote unquote some videos on YouTube about it.
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, honestly, I don't believe any of it right now, but I'm hoping to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
I mean, because it would be hard to get into it. I'm not sure how they would have gotten into it. The entrance, I believe, is still buried under sand. I believe, personally, my hypothesis is that the entrance is in front of not just the Sphinx, but the Sphinx temple, because we found that seismically, where there's sand now, there's essentially a cliff face. This is east of the Sphinx and east of the Sphinx temple, which sits right in front of the Sphinx. There's a cliff face if you remove all the sand from that area. And I suspect that there's a door that goes into a passage that then goes back west into this chamber. And to the best of my knowledge, that's not been excavated or entered. Zai Hawass, at one point was drilling around the paw of the Sphinx and claimed that they never hit the chamber and that there is no chamber there. Now, to me, that's just basic disinformation. Even from the little YouTube clip I saw, I could see that they were drilling at the wrong angle to actually hit the chamber. I'm sure they were doing that purposefully. So they could then say, well, they drilled under the left paw of the Sphinx, which is true, and that they didn't hit the chamber, which is true, but they weren't drilling at the right angle to hit it. So,
right.
That doesn't mean there isn't a chamber there,
right,
as we found seismically.
Right.
So there's a lot of shenanigans that go on.
Right. Okay, well, we've burned up this first hour, and oh boy, we'll come back in the second segment, and we'll get into Göbekli Tepe and...
Say that 3 times fast, Tom.
Yeah, I know. Hey, Ramon, I do much better with it than you do, so...
Yes, you do.
So, I want to thank you, Dr. Schoch, and everybody for listening, and...
Tom, once again, where can we find the book?
It's...
www.robertschoch, ROBERTSCHOCH.com. That's my personal website. And if people go there, they'll find a link to my book, Forgotten Civilization, just out. Probably the easiest way is to buy it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or go to your bookstore. All good bookstores should sell it too, right?
Yeah. How many books do you have out now?
Oh, it depends on how you count them. 6 to 12. Depending on how you count them. No, seriously, because some are more academic, some are, I've got an anthology I co-edited and contributed to through Oxford University Press. So, yeah, that's very different than a book like Forgotten Civilization, which is really made for, it's a solid scholarly book, but made as a good read for everyone, if I could put it that way. In fact, I'm not trying to boast, but people have told me they really like it as far as it's well written, etc. Well, people can see what others are saying on Amazon because they post reviews there. So I hope people will buy that. And also, if you go to my website, robertschoch.com, and if you're interested in coming to Egypt with me in December, that's great. I'm actually going to Easter Island over Thanksgiving in November, and people are welcome to join that also. And I have links to those.
Great.
Where last thing, where are you appearing, where people can go listen to you?
I will be appearing at CPAC in October, early October. CPAC, which stands for Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. That's, I think, in about 2 weeks or so, early October, coming right up. And I will be appearing there. That's in California, Palm Springs. And if people go to my website and then go to, if they look at the tabs on the top, there's a tab that my wife put there. My wife is my web mistress.
Nice.
And she's got a tab to presentations past and forthcoming, so people can look there. And what they want to look for is CPAC, CPAK, which stands for Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge.
Very nice. Okay, well, I hope everybody joins us into the second segment here, and hit that member button and help support Ramon and I with the 100th Monkey Radio.
Yeah, we want to go to Egypt.
Yeah. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance.
The love you deny is the pain you carry.
And we'll see you in the second segment.
Yes, This song is called Be the Change, inspired by the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who lived for peace and not violence, and told us to be the change we wish to see in the world. Freedom's calling, I feel the fire that's deep inside us. Everybody wants change, but tell me who will guide us. To the leaders that pass away, put up your lighters. It's a beautiful struggle, but it cannot divide us. We're the ones that we've always been waiting for. See yourself in the mirror and open up the door. Walk through it and feel the love throughout your pores. Be the light, life's purpose is to feel joy. Metaphysical, lyrical, standing up for truth. The only one to make change is walking in your shoes. Be the example, don't complain about the news. Making music and serving the world with the loo. Now you can be the same, or you can be the change. change. Find strength from inside, break through the chains. No one to blame, nothing to prove. You create your reality, it's up to you. Be the change
that you wanna see in the world. Like Gandhi live for peace, aspire to be someone who fights for the beliefs. Like Martin Luther King, aspire to be that love, that light, like Christ, light for the moment in need. And if you believe in Jehovah, Allah, Buddha, Krishna, it's love to me.
My soul yearns for peace in a world that's flooded with war. History's littered with body scar, trying to settle the score and maintain an archaic platform of power and greed. People fight for land out of survival and need. So I'm killing my television and I'm planting a seed to fill my head with knowledge that I'm seeing receive. Due to the media propaganda, killing my creed. Know what don't kill me, make me stronger, feeling straight when I bleed. Fighting for interest and forwards attached to feet. They try to sell you anything in this world, nothing for free. Land, air, fire, and water, they keep up in the ante while the anti-proletariats hold the powers to be. But we keep fighting, surviving and thriving, recycling and rhyming. We constantly inclining, we see through the lying and prying. They tactically keep trying to keep you from asking the why.
Be the change that you wanna see in the world. Like Gandhi live for peace, aspire to be someone who fights for the beliefs. Like Martin Luther King, aspire to be that love, that light, like Christ, light for the moment in need. And if you believe in Jehovah, Allah, Buddha, Krishna, it's love to me.
We find solutions, different possibilities, creating organizations like Aspire to Be, inspiring young minds to see, building life skills, nurturing creativity, fulfilling the youth's basic needs, listening actively, teaching the tools to succeed, positive role models, we plant the seed, the roots drink the water which feed the trees, someone help me.